وأن الله ربي وربكم فاعبدوه هذا صراط مستقيم وإن الله ربي وربكم فاعبدوه هذا صراط مستقيم.
Al-Qudrah, power. Necessary for Allah is the power over everything. What is meant by the thing here is the mentally possible. Thus, the mentally impossible is excluded from that because it does not accept existence, the impossible. By definition, if something's impossible, how would it exist? So it is not suitable to be a subject related to the power of Allah. Yani, it's not suitable to be subject to the power of Allah because it's not something that can exist or would exist. Meaning, Allah Ta'ala created this world and He gave it a reality. He gave this world a reality. So, for example, you can't sit down and stand up at the same time. That's how He made this world. And He installed in us intellects that when those intellects work right, they perceive how the reality goes. So for us, we know that not only is it a real beyond our intellectual minds, it's a truth whether we knew it or we didn't know it. And Allah Ta'ala gave us minds that if they work right, then we perceive that reality also. We're able to conceive that those two things can't happen at the same time from the same thing. So the mentally impossible is not included under the power of Allah. The impossible is not suitable to be subject to power because impossible by definition doesn't exist. How would you be subject to power if you don't exist? Ibn Hazm opposed that. Ibn Hazm the Zahiri. He said, Allah, almighty and great, has the power to take a child. Since had He not had the power to do it, He would be weak. That's what Ibn Hazm said. He said Allah could have a son or else He'd be weak. However, what he said is not necessary because the taking of a child is impossible to be attributed to Allah. And the mentally impossible is not included under the power. Yeah, and he's saying He would be weak implies that it should be something under His power. And that's what he said. He said Allah has the power to take a child for Himself, or else He'd be weak. But what he said is not necessary because taking a child is impossible to be an attribute of Allah. And for Him to say that is so strange, as if He does not know the three mental judgments. But the scholars have documented instances of this man's corrupted reasoning. He has a corrupted reasoning. How is taking a child impossible? Something that would never happen or exist? Because if God has a child, it means He has a species. If God has a species, it means He has a similar. If God has a similar, it means there's more than one God. And if there were more than one God, then this world would be glitching. Glitching. You know how, did you ever see a video game and it's glitching? Or something on the computer? So if there's more than one God, then this world will be glitching because you'll be sitting and then you'll be standing and then you'll be sitting, right? And you'll be facing the east and then you'll be facing the west and then you're just, yani, everything in the world would be random. So this is impossible. Power not being related to something is sometimes because of its deficiency. And that is in reference to the creation. Sometimes it would be because that thing does not accept entry into existence, meaning to happen, because of its being mentally impossible. Sometimes it is because of that thing's lack of acceptance of non-existence, because of it being mentally necessary. So, what the Shaykh here just talked about is, why would something not be related to power? Why would something not be powered or controlled? Yani, why would something not be under someone's power? Why would something not be under someone's power? He gave a few reasons. He said, power not being related to something, yani something not having a power over it, is sometimes, number one, because of the power's deficiency, the deficiency of said power, yani the limitations of that power. And that is in reference to the creation, since the creations have a limited power, a created power, not an absolute power over everything. So anything that's outside of the limits of that creation's power do not pertain to the power of that creation. Sometimes something would not be susceptible to power because this thing does not accept to happen in the first place. It's not something that could happen, like standing up and sitting down at the same time. You can throw laying down in there too, all three. You can't do any one of those while you're doing the other. Standing, sitting, laying. If there were a trinity, then you'd be able to do all three at the same time. So when something could not possibly happen, then it could not be under any power. And sometimes something is not subject to power because of that thing not accepting non-existence. Doesn't accept non-existence. Here, this sentence the Shaykh added, sometimes it is because of that thing's lack of acceptance of non-existence, because of it being mentally necessary. Shaykh added this sentence here for clarity. And really, what this sentence means is already stated. He said it here. Not in the same words, though. Sometimes a thing does not accept entry into existence. It doesn't accept to happen. This right here, that has two cases. It has two cases. Because why it doesn't happen could be because it's impossible, so that's why it will never happen. Or it could be that it's eternal, and that's why it always existed, and so it never happened. It always existed. There's two cases here. But the Shaykh only gave one case for this sentence, which is here. Because of it being mentally impossible, so it doesn't happen. And then he could have said here, or because of that thing's lack of acceptance of non-existence. But he started over from the beginning, and he said, and sometimes it's because of that thing's lack of acceptance of non-existence. It always existed. It existed eternally. When I say always here, I mean eternally. Sometimes it is because of that thing's lack of acceptance of non-existence. So it's not going to come into existence because it was always existing, was eternally existing, or already existing with no beginning. Yani, then this one who's been existing eternally, his existence is necessary, mentally necessary. So it can't be under any power. This existence, this necessary existence cannot be under anyone's power. Not his own power, nor anyone else's power. The inability is the first one. Yani, the created power. That's the only power that has inability or weakness. The power, the limited power. That's negated from Allah Ta'ala. Negated from the power of Allah the Exalted. Not the second. The other power is the eternal, absolute power over everything. It doesn't have a limit. And it is neither permissible to say that Allah has power. So when we say Allah's power does not have a limit, that means two things. That includes two things. One, that every single event that exists, he has power over it. No event is outside of his power. And it also means or includes that anything that's possible, he could make it happen. That's included when we say his power is not limited. When we say his power is not limited, it includes that any event that exists, he has power over it. There's no exception. So it's not limited. And it also means that anything that could possibly happen, he has the power to make it happen. Isn't he creating into the unending future? Yes. He creates into the unending future. So it is neither permissible to say that Allah has power over the impossible or that he's weak, unable. He doesn't have power over the impossible. We don't say either of those, that he has power over the impossible or he does not have power over the impossible. Some said, just like you do not say about the stone that it is knowledgeable or ignorant, meaning, if you deny that a stone is knowledgeable or ignorant, did you deny the existence of the stone? No. So if you say Allah does not have power over the impossible, nor is he powerless over the impossible, that's not deeming him weak. Rather, this impossible, it's not applicable. That's why. It's just not applicable. The difference is that saying God's power is not related to the impossible or the necessary, it doesn't mean that he's weak. It means that the impossible and the necessary are not applicable to the power. So relate here means apply or pertain. And also what helps to clarify what you're asking me about, about Bakr, is that power is related to what? Something that's, let's say, I'm going to just use some simple words here. Power is related to what's powered, right? Knowledge is related to what's known. Sight is related to what's seen. Hearing is what's related to what's heard. Speech is related to what's spoken. Power is related to what's powered. So what we're saying is, what's eternally existing is not powered in the first place. The power doesn't apply to it. And what's impossible is not powered because it doesn't even exist. So there's no weakness being attributed to Allah. You said, are the existence of two opposites in one mental in one a mental impossibility? If it's at the same time, then it would be. Not at two different times. Yeah, like sitting and standing. If they're at two different times, then there's nothing impossible. If it's at the same time, then yes, it's impossible. In other words, the existence of opposites proves the oneness of God. That's why had there been more than one God, then the whole creation would be glitching and nothing would make any sense. And then you would be sitting and standing at the same time. Yes, the existence of opposites proves the oneness of God. Because had there been more than one God, it would be valid that two opposites could occur in one vessel at the same time. Because each opposite could be under an independent creating power. So had there really been a trinity, it would be possible that one could lay down, sit up, and stand up all at the same time. Lay down, sit, and stand all at the same time. Each one of the Trinity could have his own creating power to make you like that at one time. And this is impossible. Likewise is the response to the saying of some atheists. Yani, this is the way to respond. This is also the way to respond to what some atheists say. They say, is Allah able to create one like himself? So they're looking for yes or no. No matter which way you answer, he's going to hold it against you. He realizes that's a trick question. For him, this question shows that God doesn't exist because you can't answer it with a yes or a no without a rebuttal from him. Without, yani, you can't answer it with a yes or a no without that being invalid. So for an atheist, the fact that you can't answer this question with a yes or a no without both of those or either of those being invalid, for him, that's a proof that God doesn't exist. Because if you say yes, he's able to make one like himself, that would mean that something could be like God. And if we say no, then that would mean God is weak. So the answer is this is mentally impossible. This is rationally impossible. Yani, the question itself is not valid. The question itself is not valid. The author says, in that, there is permitting what is mentally impossible. To say, yes, he could, that permits what's impossible, that God could have a similar. The clarification of that, yani the answer, or a correct answer, a clear response, is that Allah is eternal, beginningless. And had he had a similar, it would have been eternal, beginningless. And the eternal cannot be created. What's beginningless can't have a beginning. That's what it means to be created, to have a beginning. Because it's already existent. The eternal one is already existing eternally. So how would he be created? How would the presently existing be made to come into being? That's impossible. So the question is a corrupt question. As for the mentally impossible, its non-acceptance of entering into existence is clear. Yani, the mentally impossible, by definition, the impossible is what could not be. So, what could not be, then therefore does not enter into existence. So that's clear. Then, if something is mentally impossible and therefore does not enter into existence, it cannot be, then it would not be subject to any power, not to the power of Allah, nor to anyone else's power, because it wouldn't be, it wouldn't exist. As for the mental necessity, it does not accept occurring existence. What's the mental necessity? The mental necessity is what the mind deems that it must exist, and non-existence is impossible for it. The mental necessity is that which non-existence does not apply to it. Only existence applies or is valid. Then, if this is the case, if the mentally necessary exists without non-existence, then that means it would not be something that comes into existence after it wasn't existing. It would not be something that has an entrance into existence. And therefore, it would not be subject to anyone's power. The mentally necessary is not subject to anyone's power. It does not accept occurring existence because its existence is eternal. There is a difference between existence and entering into existence. Existence includes the eternal existence and the eventual existence. Existence includes created existence and uncreated existence. And as for entry into existence, starting to exist, that is only the eventual existence. It only applies to the created, eventual, occurring, happening existence that starts. So, the mental necessity is Allah and His attributes. because the mind does not accept that Allah exists after non-existence. Allah is necessary mentally, meaning his existence. His existence is eternal, and his attributes are eternal, beginningless. So, it is not said about Allah or his attributes entering into existence, beginning to exist, because Allah's existence and his attributes are eternal. So, our saying the mental necessity does not accept entry into existence is correct. However, the understanding of some of the beginners in the science of the creed is deficient in this. Yani, some people who haven't become accustomed to this knowledge and this reasoning, they're not able to process this as efficiently as it should be processed in the mind. So the understanding of some of the beginners in the science of the creed is deficient in this. To say that there's a mental necessity, and the mental necessity, by definition, does not come into existence because it always existed, yani it existed eternally. Therefore, it's not subject to any power. Some people who aren't accustomed to this, they don't process that easily, although it's correct. As for the one who has practiced, the intended meaning is clear. Al-ilm, knowledge. Know that the knowledge of Allah is eternal and beginningless, just as his self is eternal. So, he never ceased to be knowledgeable of himself and his attributes and what he brings into existence of his creations. He always knew all of that. He eternally knew all of that. Thus, he is not attributed with an eventual knowledge, a starting knowledge, because had his being attributed with events been valid, had it been valid to attribute to Allah events and occurrences and happenings, then eternality would be inapplicable to him. Because whatever is a vessel for events or a site for events must definitely be an event. So here, Shaykh mentions this term here, mahal lil hawadith. Mahal lil hawadith. The way we have it translated is a vessel for events. And I might say sometimes a site, S-I-T-E, a site for events. So that's like us. Each one of us, for example, blinks. Those are events. The blinking, those are events. And breathes and has a heartbeat. Those are all events. And we get up and we move around and then we go still and we sleep and we wake up, etc., etc., etc. We change our clothing, etc. So those are events and occurrences. That makes us vessels for events or sites for events. And whatever is a vessel for events must definitely be itself an event. And whatever gives a false impression of the renewal of knowledge for Allah, whatever, any ayah from the Quran, for example, that gives the false impression to someone who doesn't understand well, that Allah gets new knowledge, exalted is He, from the Quranic verses, yani something that gives a wrong impression from these Quranic verses, like what? Like the saying of Allah the Exalted, الآن خفف الله عنكم وعلم أن فيكم ضعفا. Now Allah has lightened the ruling of jihad for you, and He knew about weakness in you, and He knew about weakness in you. So this ayah does not mean that what one might falsely conclude from it, that it means that Allah knew something anew that he didn't know before. So really the ayah means, or let's say the word al-an, which means now, is linked to khaffafa. He lightened. Now he lightened. It doesn't mean now he knew. So you can't link the al-an to the alima. Now he knew about weakness in you. That's wrong. His saying wa'alim, which means he knew, does not refer back to his saying al-an, now. Instead, the meaning is that Allah the Exalted has lightened the ruling for you now, because he knew by his prior knowledge, his eternal knowledge, in eternity, that there shall be weakness in you. And likewise, his saying, exalted is he, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ حَتَّى نَعْلَمَ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّابِرِينَ, which literally translates as, we will test you so that we would know the one who strives among you, as well as those who are patient. So one might think this means Allah doesn't know yet, so he's going to test you so he would know. Its meaning is, and we would test you so that we would differentiate, meaning display to the creation, who are the fighters and who are the patient ones from others. Allah was already knowledgeable about that, as copied by Al-Bukhari from Abu Ubaidah Ma'mar ibn al-Muthanna. And this is similar to the saying of Allah Ta'ala, لِيَمِيزَ اللَّهُ الْخَبِيثَ مِنَ الطَّيِّبِ, so that Allah would distinguish for the slaves between the wicked and the good. Doesn't mean that Allah didn't know it prior. So then, according to what we just said, the meaning of these ayahs that looks like it's saying so that Allah would know, the meaning of these is that so that he would distinguish, make distinguished for the creations. That's one way to explain. That's how Shaykh explained here. And some scholars explain these statements in another way. They said it means so that we would know it as it happens, as we knew it before it happened. So that it means, what they're saying is, the meaning is, so that what he knew in eternity would manifest. And then he would know it when it happens. So that's how some scholars explained it. So that we would know, according to them, it means so that when it happens, we would know it as we knew it eternally before it happened. Al-Hayah, life. Life is necessary for Allah to be an attribute of His, the Exalted. So, He is living, unlike others who are alive. Since His life is eternal and everlasting, beginningless and endless, it is not by soul and blood. So here, to remind you, when we say two things are similar, it's not because we're using the same word. When we say two things are similar, it's because one can replace the other. So whenever you're doubtful about a statement, is this a statement of likening Allah to the creation? Or not? Then resort back to this. Yani, is the meaning here, is the meaning of the statement that one of them can replace the other? If the meaning of the statement is that one of them can replace the other, then it is likening Allah to the creations, whether it's the same word or a different word. But if it doesn't mean that one of them can replace the other, then it's not likening Allah to the creations, even if it's the same word. So, for example, we just said, he is living unlike others who are alive, so we just used the same word. But we said here, since his life is eternal and everlasting, that can't apply to anyone else. It's not by soul, that doesn't apply to anyone else. It's not by soul and blood, so this life then that he has cannot be replaced, substituted. You cannot take the life of an angel and substitute it for Allah and give the life of Allah to the angel, or the life of a prophet and give it to Allah and the life of Allah and give it to a prophet. These are not interchangeable. One of them does not substitute the other. Neither of them can stand for the other. Therefore, even if the word is the same, the meaning is different. The evidence for the necessity of his life is the existence of this world. For had he not been alive, nothing of this world would exist. Why? Because had he not been alive, then he wouldn't have had power and will and knowledge, and then, therefore, nothing of this world would exist. However, the existence of the world is confirmed by the senses and by necessity without doubt. So therefore, he is alive.